Most people think they can spot low intelligence easily. They imagine someone who struggles in school, someone who can't hold a conversation, someone who makes obvious mistakes. But here's what behavioral psychology actually shows us. Low intelligence isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself. Some of the most limiting thinking patterns in the world look completely normal on the surface. They blend in. They feel justified. They even feel smart to the people who have them. Because real intelligence isn't just about what you know. It's about how you think, how you respond when you're wrong, how you process new information, how you adapt when life doesn't go the way you expected. In this video, you're going to discover 11 hidden signs of low intelligence that most people completely overlook, and the psychology behind why these patterns are so difficult to recognize. Let's begin. Sign 1. Refusing to admit when they are wrong. One of the most overlooked signs of limited thinking is the complete inability to say 3 simple words. I was wrong. On the surface, this can look like confidence, like someone who stands their ground, like a person who knows what they believe. But psychologically, something very different is happening. When a person cannot admit a mistake, it usually means their ego has become more important than the truth. Somewhere in their mind, being wrong has become the same as being weak. Being wrong feels like a threat to their identity. Intellectual humility, the ability to recognize the limits of your own thinking, is one of the strongest markers of genuine intelligence. Research in cognitive psychology consistently shows that people who can change their minds when presented with better evidence tend to make smarter decisions over time. Think about someone you know who has never once said, "Actually, I think I was wrong about that." No matter how clearly the evidence points in another direction, they double down, they reframe, they deflect. That's not strength. That's a thinking pattern that makes learning impossible. Because growth only begins when you can look at your own beliefs honestly. Sign 2. Blaming everyone except themselves. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. There's a pattern that appears in nearly every area of life: relationships, work, finances, and it follows the same script every time. Something goes wrong. And somehow, it is never their fault. The teacher was unfair. The boss was against them. The economy was bad. The people around them let them down. There's always a reason, and that reason always points outward. Psychologists call this an external locus of control, the belief that life is something that happens to you, rather than something you have the power to shape. This is different from recognizing when external factors genuinely play a role. Life is not always fair, and circumstances do matter. The sign isn't acknowledging difficulty. The sign is never looking inward, never asking, what could I have done differently? What was my role in this outcome? Self-reflection is one of the most powerful tools in human thinking. Without it, every failure becomes someone else's problem to fix. And a person who never takes responsibility for their own decisions can never really improve their own life. Sign 3. Believing only what confirms their opinion. But there's another pattern that quietly operates underneath both of the signs we just discussed. It's called confirmation bias, and it affects everyone to some degree. Here's how it works. The human brain is naturally drawn to information that supports what it already believes. When we encounter facts that challenge our existing views, the brain doesn't treat them as interesting. It treats them as a threat. What separates strong thinkers from weak ones is not the absence of this bias, it's the awareness of it. Intelligent people actively seek out perspectives that challenge their own. They read the opposing argument. They ask the uncomfortable question. They sit with the possibility that they might be missing something important. But a person with limited thinking patterns does the opposite. They gravitate toward the sources that already agree with them. They dismiss contradicting evidence without examining it. They mistake familiarity with truth. An everyday example. Someone forms a strong opinion about a topic after watching one video that confirms what they already thought. When someone shows them research that suggests a more complex picture, they reject it immediately, not because they analyzed it, but because it feels wrong. Feeling right and being right are two very different things. Strong thinkers know this. Sign 4. Talking to appear intelligent instead of listening to learn. Most people assume that the smartest person in the room talks the most. But watch carefully in any high-level conversation, and you'll notice something different. The most intelligent people ask a lot of questions. They pause. They listen fully before responding. They're genuinely curious about what the other person knows. This is because truly intelligent people understand something fundamental. Other people have information they don't have yet. But someone operating from a limited thinking pattern approaches conversations differently. They talk to perform. They focus on how they're coming across rather than what they might learn. They interrupt. They redirect every topic back to something they already know. They rarely ask a genuine follow-up question. The goal isn't understanding. The goal is impression. And this is subtle, because it can look like engagement. It can look like enthusiasm, but underneath it, there is very little curiosity. Curiosity is one of the strongest predictors of intelligence researchers have identified. The desire to genuinely understand something drives a person to keep learning throughout their entire life. A person who talks only to be seen as smart has, without realizing it, placed a ceiling on what they can learn. Sign 5. Jumping to conclusions without enough evidence. Now, this next sign might be the one most people will recognize immediately in others, but rarely in themselves. It's the pattern of deciding before knowing. Someone hears one side of a story and forms a complete picture. Someone misses one phone call and assumes the worst. Someone sees a single behavior and builds an entire character judgment around it. The human brain moves fast. It evolved to make quick decisions, and that speed has real value in certain situations. But the ability to slow down, to recognize when you don't yet have enough information, is one of the clearest markers of careful, disciplined thinking. Cognitive psychologists describe this as a failure in what they call need for cognition, the willingness to think things through carefully before landing on a conclusion. A person with a strong thinking pattern asks, what else might be true here? What am I not seeing? What would I need to know before I decide? A person with a weak thinking pattern decides first and then looks for reasons to justify the decision. The danger isn't just that they're wrong. The danger is that once they've decided, they often stop looking for better information. Sign 6. Overestimating their own knowledge. This brings us to a pattern that psychologists have documented in fascinating detail. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it describes something most people have witnessed, though rarely in themselves. Here's the core finding. People with limited knowledge in a particular area tend to significantly overestimate their own understanding of it. They feel more confident than their actual level of knowledge justifies. Meanwhile, genuine experts tend to be far more cautious. The more someone truly understands a subject, the more aware they become of how much they still don't know. So the gap looks like this. The person who has spent 30 years studying a topic will hedge carefully before making a claim. The person who read 2 articles last week will speak with complete certainty. This isn't arrogance in the simple sense. It's a structural gap in self-awareness. An intelligent thinker constantly asks, how confident should I actually be in this? What are the limits of what I know? A limited thinker rarely asks that question, because they don't yet know enough to know what they're missing. The most dangerous version of this is when someone becomes an obstacle to real expertise, confidently dismissing the knowledge of people who have spent years developing it. Sign 7. Never asking questions. Here's something that tends to go unnoticed. Most people assume that asking questions signals weakness, that if you ask, you're admitting you don't know, and not knowing, in many social environments, feels vulnerable. So the protective response is to stay quiet, to nod, to act like the information already makes sense. But watch genuinely intelligent people, and you'll notice that they are relentless questioners, not because they are confused, but because they understand that questions are how understanding deepens. A child asks dozens of questions a day without self-consciousness. That natural curiosity is what makes early learning so powerful. At some point, social pressure teaches many people to suppress that instinct. The result is a person who has gaps in their understanding, but will never fill them, because filling them would require admitting they exist. This pattern is especially limiting because it's invisible to the person who has it. They experience it as confidence, as already knowing. But underneath, the knowledge never gets built. Real intellectual confidence doesn't come from pretending. It comes from having genuinely worked to understand something. And that process always runs through questions. Sign 8. Repeating the same mistakes without learning. Every person makes mistakes. That is not a sign of anything except being human. The sign we're talking about here is something different. It's the pattern of making the same mistake again and again, without apparent reflection, without visible adjustment, without any sign that the previous experience changed anything. This could show up in relationships, the same argument, the same dynamic, the same outcome, with different people. It could show up in finances, the same poor decision repeated across years. It could show up in work habits, social situations, health choices. Intelligent thinking requires a capacity that psychologists sometimes call metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking, to step back from an experience and ask, what actually happened here? Why did it go that way? What would I do differently? Without that reflective loop, experience doesn't automatically become wisdom. It just becomes repetition. There's an important distinction to make here. Repeating a mistake once doesn't indicate anything particularly significant. People need time to process and change. But a person who repeats the same fundamental pattern across years, across contexts, across relationships, without ever examining why, that is a sign that reflection isn't happening. And without reflection, the future will look a great deal like the past. Sign 9. Attacking people instead of ideas. This next sign is one of the clearest to observe in public conversation, and one of the most destructive to genuine thinking. When someone disagrees with an idea expressed by another person, there are two directions the response can go. It can engage with the idea itself. It can identify where the logic is incomplete, where the evidence is weak, where the conclusion doesn't follow. That is honest intellectual engagement. Or it can turn toward the person. It can question their motives, their character, their intelligence, their background. Philosophers have a name for this. It's called an ad hominem response, and it almost always appears when someone can't effectively address the actual argument. Because if the idea is clearly wrong, you don't need to attack the person who holds it. You can simply demonstrate why it's wrong. The attack on the person is often a signal that the attacker doesn't have the tools to engage with the substance. Watch any online debate, any comment section, any high-stakes conversation. The moment an argument becomes, "You're an idiot," rather than, "Here's why your reasoning is flawed," you are almost certainly watching someone who has run out of intellectual tools. Strong thinking attacks ideas. Weak thinking attacks people. Sign 10. Believing their first impression is always correct. Now here's a pattern that feels like confidence, but is actually a refusal to update. First impressions are powerful. The brain forms rapid judgments about people and situations, often within seconds. This is evolutionary. Fast social assessment kept our ancestors safe. But we are not living in that environment anymore. And the intelligence required in modern life is more complex than fast assessment. A thoughtful person treats a first impression as a starting point, as a hypothesis, not a verdict. They hold the judgment lightly, knowing that new information might change it. A limited thinker treats the first impression as a conclusion. Once the judgment is formed, they interpret everything that follows through that lens. Behavior that contradicts the judgment gets ignored or explained away. Behavior that confirms it feels significant. This matters deeply in relationships, in professional situations, in how people are treated and judged. And it matters because it makes a person fundamentally less accurate about the world, which means their decisions about people and situations will consistently be based on incomplete information that was gathered in the first 30 seconds of an encounter. The world is far more complex than any first impression can capture. Intelligent people know this and stay curious. Sign 11. Thinking changing their mind is weakness. We've arrived at the last sign, and in many ways, the most important one, because everything we've discussed across this video connects to a single underlying belief that many people hold, often without realizing it. That belief is this: changing your mind means you are weak. If you're truly confident, you hold your position. If you're truly intelligent, you don't need to update your beliefs. The moment you shift your view, you've shown uncertainty. And uncertainty, in this mindset, is failure. This belief is not just wrong. It is the single most effective way to stop growing. Because the entire process of learning, all of it, requires changing your mind. Every time you learn something new, your model of the world updates. Every time you encounter a better argument, your position can refine. Every time an experience contradicts what you expected, you have a choice. Defend the old belief or update? The greatest thinkers in history were characterized by their willingness to revise their thinking in the face of better evidence. That capacity is not weakness. It is the engine of intelligence itself. The person who hasn't changed any significant belief in years has not been exceptionally consistent. They have been exceptionally closed. And a closed mind is the only environment where real growth cannot happen. Before we end, one important thing. These 11 signs are not labels. They're not a way to permanently categorize yourself or the people in your life. They are patterns, and patterns can be changed. Every one of the behaviors we discussed in this video can be unlearned, slowly, with patience, and genuine self-awareness. The fact that you're here, willing to examine these ideas critically and honestly, already tells you something meaningful about how you think. Genuine intelligence was never about always being right. It was never about having all the answers before anyone else. It is about being willing to learn, being willing to examine, being willing to say, I was wrong about that, and now I understand something better. That is what growth actually looks like. If this video helped you understand yourself or someone around you a little more clearly, subscribe to Oria Pixel for more psychology content built to sharpen how you see the world. And when you're ready, the next video is already waiting.